Grant's Grand Campaign Plan. Within days of his appointment as General-in-Chief, Ulysses S. Grant prepared a major spring campaign. He hoped to take advantage of the Union Army's numerical superiority with a coordinated offensive that would strike the Confederates simultaneously on several fronts. He envisioned the Federal armies as three great strategic wings: left, center, and right. The left wing was the Army of the James, concentrated near Yorktown, Virginia, and commanded by Major General Benjamin F. Butler. It was to march up the James River to approach Richmond from the southeast. The right wing, which consisted of Major General William T. Sherman's Western armies in Georgia and Tennessee, was ordered to advance against Atlanta. Grant's center wing was Meade's Army of the Potomac, located along the Rapidan River northwest of Richmond. That army was to make the main Federal thrust against Lee and Richmond. However, it was on a political tether that required it to be interposed between Lee and Washington, D.C. In a secondary role to support Meade's Union offensive was the Department of West Virginia, located west of the Blue Ridge. Grant intended its units to disrupt Lee's supply lines by cutting the railroads in western Virginia, with the added goal of drawing some of Lee's forces away from Richmond. Newly appointed Major General Franz Sigel commanded the department. Sigel had been educated at a German military academy and saw brief service in the European revolutions of 1848. After fleeing to America, he lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and enjoyed strong connections to the large German community. Despite poor military performances in several previous campaigns, Sigel's political connections were strong enough to protect him from relief from duty. Although the Department of West Virginia was a military backwater, Sigel's department was nonetheless a complex and difficult one to command. Most of his forces were short-term volunteers or state troops strung out in small detachments to protect the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in western Maryland and northern West Virginia. His outpost also acted as an alarm for any Confederate invasion across the Potomac. Given Sigel's reputation and limited resources, Grant expected little from him in the way of support, but was determined to use all possible assets in his grand campaign. In early April, Grant began issuing detailed orders for the upcoming campaign, and on 4 May 1864, the great offensive began. The armies were now all ready to move, Grant observed, and they were acting as a unit as far as such a thing was possible over such a vast field. The Army of the Potomac crossed the Rapidan and marched to challenge Lee in the area west of Fredericksburg known as the Wilderness. Sigel also made preparations to participate in the upcoming operations. Initial movements and preparations. Other than small raids and skirmishes, there had been little military activity in the valley since Lee's army passed through it in July 1863. Confederate Brigadier General John D. Imboden led the small Valley District Brigade with less than 3,000 men in scattered locations to keep watch on Union activities and, if given the chance, to raid the Baltimore and Ohio trains, tracks, and depots. In addition, Confederate partisan units led by Lieutenant Colonel John S. Mosby and Captain John McNeil threatened Union rear areas and made forays against small Union detachments. Davis and Lee worried about the threat to their valley supply lines, but, faced with an anticipated Union offensive against Richmond, they had few resources to spare for their security. In February 1864, Davis appointed Major General John C. Breckinridge to command the Confederate Department of Western Virginia, which included Imboden's district, with responsibility to defend the Shenandoah Valley, protect railroads, and block any Federal attempt to approach Richmond from the west. Breckinridge had served in the Mexican War without seeing action. He had later entered politics and had served as U.S. Vice President, and then as a U.S. Senator from Kentucky, until he joined the Confederacy in 1861. Breckinridge's headquarters was at Dublin in southwestern Virginia. His department roster listed about 8,000 men, including Imboden's brigade. To bolster the valley's defenses, Brigadier General John H. Morgan's brigade of cavalry came from Tennessee to protect the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad and valuable lead mines near Wytheville, Virginia. Sigel also took command of his department in March 1864, with headquarters at Cumberland, Maryland. He brought along 2 fellow Germans from his old staff, Brigadier Generals Max Weber and Julius Stahel. Weber became Sigel's chief of staff, while the Hungarian-born Stahel was named chief of cavalry with the rank of major general. In mid-March, Sigel's troops totaled 24,000 men, most assigned to security duty for the B&O Railroad. 2 semi-independent detachments, one of about 3,500 infantrymen under Brigadier General George Crook, and the other a cavalry brigade of nearly 3,000 troopers led by Brigadier General William W. Averill, were encamped near Charleston, West Virginia, almost 200 miles to the southwest. Aware of Grant's intention for a general campaign and keen to participate in the action, Sigel began pulling together a 3rd field force from various garrisons guarding the railroad. To strengthen the reduced security forces, he ordered construction of additional blockhouses and entrenchments at key locations along the rail line and at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. Grant's campaign orders arrived at Sigel's headquarters on 29 March, carried by Major General Edward O.C. Ord. The new orders directed Sigel to assemble a force of 9,500 infantry, cavalry, and artillery with 10 days' rations at Beverly, West Virginia, over 100 miles southwest of Cumberland. Under the command of Ord, this force would advance into the valley to cut the Virginia Central Railroad at Staunton, Virginia. At the same time, Crook and Averill, with Crook in overall command, were to cut the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad, destroy the New River Bridge near Dublin, Virginia, and prepare to continue east to attack Lynchburg. Sigel was to follow Ord with the Army's wagon train of supplies for a rendezvous with Crook at Staunton. Ord, however, grew impatient with Sigel's slow pace and obtained from Grant a reassignment in mid-April. On 17 April, as Ord left, Sigel decided to take his place. He received new instructions from Grant for the coming campaign, which ordered him to make a diversionary threat against Staunton and the Virginia Central Railroad. Sigel was to go no farther south than Winchester, or perhaps Cedar Creek 10 miles farther south, so as to remain a protective force for Washington and the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. The intent was to draw Confederate units north, away from Crook and Averill, who were the actual raiding forces. Crook's target remained the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad Bridge, while Averill planned to destroy the large salt works near Saltville, Virginia. Following the attacks, the 2 columns were to unite at Staunton. Before the end of April, Sigel had 5 divisions in his department of West Virginia: 2 infantry, 2 cavalry, and a mixed reserve division. Sigel placed the reserve troops at Harper's Ferry and in outposts along the B&O route, on trains as escorts, and on armored rail cars. He retained personal command over 2 field divisions of about 7,000 men. The 1st Infantry Division under General Jeremiah C. Sullivan, and the 1st Cavalry Division led by Stahel. Sigel's other 2 divisions were Crook's infantry and Averill's cavalry in West Virginia. Reinforcements raised their total strength to some 10,000 men, but supplies were short and wagons and horses were in poor condition. Despite Sigel's energetic efforts, the Federal High Command had little confidence in him. The Union Army's Chief of Staff, Major General Henry Halleck, wrote, "It seems but little better than murder to give important commands to men such as Sigel." Nevertheless, Lincoln kept Sigel at his post in order to shore up political support among German Americans, thousands of whom were serving in Union armies at the beginning of 1864.